There was a comment on a recent video that made me think, y'all really don't know how special Darius Taylor is, plus huge coaching changes for the Gophers on today's episode of Locked On Golden Gophers.
Hey, you are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
What's up, Gopher fans? You are listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And today we are talking about Darius Taylor and just how special that true freshman running back is for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. On top of that, we got to talk about the huge changes coming for the coaching. On the Gophers side, we have 2 of the 3 top assistants now need to be filled for the Gophers before the 2024 season. And then finally, I want to talk about Athan Kaliakmanis. He transfers to Rutgers. What does that mean? What does it look like? Could there be a matchup for the Gophers and Athan headed this season? We're going to dive into all of that on today's show, so definitely be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any daily Gophers content going forward. Now, we're going to be talking about a lot of basketball coming up, especially with the Gophers football season ending, but that does not mean that the Gophers football talk stops here. As we get into 2025 recruiting, we'll have that covered here. As we get coaching hires, we'll have that covered here, and so much more. So be sure to hit subscribe, tell other Gopher fans about it so they can tune along as well. And any comments you have, I always appreciate them. I get caught up on them. And it even inspired today's show, the first segment of today's show, with just how special can Darius Taylor be? Now, in a comment on a recent video of mine with my way too early predictions for the 2024 season, I said Darius Taylor would have 1,500 plus rushing yards if healthy. Now, a listener was worried about Darius Thomas, and if he got that many yards in the 2024 season, then that means Minnesota's offense was likely in a bad spot, given not giving the other running backs touches or the passing game struggling. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper. I wanted to look into the numbers of what all that looks like and just how special did his season look for the Gophers this year, but also how have other backs shown out this past season? What were the top backs looking like in that front? So last season, there were 5 running backs that had above 1,500 rushing yards, only 5 of them in the entire country, and 4 of them were at other Power 5 schools. Ollie Gordon, who I believe ended up winning the Doak Walker Award, 1,732 rush yards. Then you had Cody Schrader, who was with Mizzou. He had 1,627 rushing yards. Then you had Taj Brooks, and you had Omarion Hampton from UNC. Both of those just got above 1,500 at 1,538 and 1,504. I believe Vidal over at Troy was the only one that was not a Power 5 running back. Now, of those Power 5 backs, all 4 of them getting above 1,500 yards, all 4 or 5 of those running backs also had 250 or more carries in the season this year. In fact, most of those 5 running backs were between 280 and 295 running attempts in this 2023 football season. Those 5 running backs also were the top 5 running backs when it came to yards per game. Now, that doesn't surprise too many. It goes hand in hand. If you're leading in rushing yards, you're probably up to near the top in rushing yards per game. The only time you really got to dive into rushing yard per game and how it differs is in the case of an injury and the pace that players were on prior to that injury. And Darius Taylor falls into that boat, because if you look at those 5, they led the way. They led the charge in rushing yards per game. If you look at NCAA's FBS stats on the NCAA.com, you will see those 5 at the top of the list, but that list only takes account of the running backs who have played 9 or more games. Now, Darius Taylor only played 6, so you won't find him there, but if you go over to teamrankings.com, you can find basically all of the players who have played in at least a handful of games and where they rank across the league. Well, if you look at that, Darius Taylor in his 6 games led the entire nation in rush yards per game by a landslide. We're talking by almost 10 yards per game. The next closest was Cody Schrader, who averaged 124 yards a game. Darius Taylor averaged 133 yards per game. And that is even taking into account the Nebraska game where he had 1 carry for 3 yards. So that is heavily dinging his yards per game total because he only had 3 yards in that one game. But if you look at outside of that one Nebraska game, you're talking about Darius Taylor had 159 yards per game in those 5 other games as a collective. So the 133 is already special by itself, almost 10 yards per game better than the next running back on the list. But 159 is insane. That truly tells you how special this kid is, and the productivity that he put out there was at an insane rate. Now, believe it or not, last year was actually Coach Fleck's lowest amount of running back carries for Coach Fleck in a full season with the Golden Gophers. In 2023, we only had 505 carries. All of his other full seasons, you saw 581 in 22, 602 attempts in 2021. Then you had 560, 524, and 526 in 19, 18, and 17. So it was the significantly the lowest by over 20 touches. On top of that, if you take the average of carries per year in those 6 full years, you get 550 running back carries in a single season in a Coach Fleck team-led, running back room, rushing attempts. 550 carries is the average per year in Coach Fleck's time here with Minnesota. Now, a part of that is due to part of the reason that 2023 was the lowest was due to injuries, but there were a lot of injuries in 2021 as well. Obviously, it wasn't necessarily because Minnesota was passing more, because as a team, this was PJ Fleck's 3rd highest year for passing attempts, only behind 2019 and 2018. And even to that notion, we were still a bottom 10 passing team in the entire country when it comes to passing attempts. So it's not like we were throwing the ball a crazy lot more this season. On top of that, part of it was the defense giving up longer drives and not getting the ball back into the offense's hands. Now, we know Coach Fleck likes to control the clock, win the time of possession battle. That is the goal, and then some. But part of it was not having the ball on the offense as long. We didn't always win that time of possession battle. And on top of that, we had a lot of 3 and outs this season. So you're talking about a year in which Coach Fleck had the least amount of running back carries in a full season with the Gophers. That means, long story short, even with Minnesota splitting more carries to a Jordan Newben or to a C.A. Bangura, which is what Gopher fans want to see. They want to see some more of those carries distributed so Darius Taylor can stay healthy. Even if you do that, the size of the pie will probably be bigger than what we saw in this season and closer to the average of that 550 carries per year, which means all of them can see more touches, in which case Darius Taylor can still thrive. Now, for simple numbers, just to try to get an example, if you take that Bangura and Newben both have 10 carries a game, that's about 240 carries, and that still leaves 310 carries available. Now, if you shell out about 50 carries between the quarterback and maybe some other younger running backs, that leaves you with around 270 carries. Now, I don't know if Darius Taylor will actually get 270 carries, but that's a lot of wiggle room for your lead back to have. Now, the lead ball carrier, I wanted to see, okay, so how often, how many touches does the lead ball carrier get in a PJ Fleck team? The lead ball carrier in 2017, 229 attempts, only 1 running back had over 100 attempts. At 2018, 202 was the highest number of carries for the lead back, and 2 running backs had over 100 carries. 2019, 228 was the lead back carries, and there were 2 running backs again over 100 yards. 2020, even in a shortened season, Mo had 201 attempts. Then you had 21 where 166 was the lead back for carries, but there were 3 different running backs over 100 carries. Again, a ton of injuries in that 2021 season. And then 2022, 320 carries for Mo Ibrahim, who was the lead back, 2 running backs over 100 carries, with Trey Pats coming in at 101. And then finally, last year, Darius Taylor led the team with 138 carries in those 5 games during the regular season, 6 games with the bowl game. 2 running backs again over 100 carries, Jordan Newman getting over 100 as well. So this is already telling us Bangura or Newman probably won't get above 100 carries, barring an injury. If everyone stays healthy in this room, you probably only have 2 running backs that really get over 100 carries just based on the history of a Coach Fleck-led team. Now, on top of that, in the full 4 seasons with a healthy lead running back, so not 2021 and not 2023, where we suffered a ton of injuries in both those seasons, but the 4 other seasons where we had a healthy running back, the lead running back saw between 230 and 245 carries on average. So with that, you take that number and you say, let's run with 240. It's kind of right there in the middle of that. Darius Taylor averaged 5.8 yards per carry. So even if you drop that and say his yards per carry falls a little bit to 5.3, at 240 carries, you're still seeing about 1,300 rushing yards. And if you're talking about 240 carries in 12 games, that's only about 20 carries a game. So in the end, I think he's going to have more than 20 carries a game. So this is the low side. Even on the low side with Darius Taylor, it just shows you how truly special this player is. And so even on the low end, he probably gets about 1,300 rushing yards. If you can take into consideration, it'll be year 2. The game will be slowing down. He'll likely have health. And on top of that, getting stronger in this offseason. The ceiling for this young Gophers running back is truly special. So again, thank you for the listener for commenting down below with your thoughts. Those thoughts help generate other ideas for this show, and that's how we jumped in on Darius Taylor. If you have other thoughts for segments, always drop them in the comments, and I'll dive in a little bit deeper. But we got to talk about the huge coaching decisions that await Minnesota. It could make or break the 2024 season, and we're diving in coming up next. First, I got to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel because they have an awesome deal for new customers in which if you win a $5 money line bet, you pick a team and win that $5 bet straight up on the money line, you will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Now, if you'd have listened to me, I kind of tried to throw it out there for you and said I would have took LSU over Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin gave them a run for their money, and I was seriously surprised by that. Now, Grant Nussmeier, younger quarterback, they lost their Heisman candidate, not playing in this bowl game, but still, Wisconsin held their own, and it was solid. But in the end, all you got to do is pick the right winner, and the winner would have been LSU, like I tried to tell y'all. So you go take your shot on one of these on the national championship. Who do you think it is? Michigan, Washington? If you pick the right one on a $5 bet, you're getting $150 in bonus bets guaranteed over at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. And you can use the app in so many different ways. You can do live same game parlays. You can do find bets in the new Explore tab so they can kind of suggest or offer new different kinds of bets for you. And on top of that, you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays and more over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, Gophers fans, let's talk about this massive coaching decision waiting for Minnesota because it's not just one now. It is officially 2. Not only is Minnesota having to find a defensive coordinator this offseason, but now they have to find a special teams coordinator as well because Minnesota will not be retaining Rob Wenger. Now, a lot of folks are probably really happy about that. In fact, many Gophers fans are probably elated to the fact that we will have some changes on the special teams because they have not been so special aside from Dragan Kesic, who holds his own with the golden hammer, the hammer of that leg of his. But overall, I guess it's the Serbian hammer is what people are calling it. But regardless, Dragan Kesic has held it down. But when it comes to the special teams as a whole, they haven't been too special. So finding some new life, a breath of fresh air, I think it's going to be great for the Gophers overall, but that means you are now hiring 2 of your top 3 assistants when it comes to the 3 facets of football: offense, defense, and special teams. You need a special teams coordinator, you need a defensive coordinator, and you're heading into the biggest offseason in recent history with the massive changes within the Big Ten Conference. So overall, it all comes down to the Gophers have to take a swing on these hires, but you also got to hit, and you got to hit big, because if you want to hang around and you want to do something special in this bigger conference in which 2 of the teams are going to the national championship this year, Michigan and Washington, both of them will be Big Ten teams next season. So next year, the reigning champion will be from the Big Ten. And you're talking about you want to hang around with those type of teams. You want to compete with those type of teams. Well, you have to hit it out of the park with these hires, especially on the defensive coordinator side. But this is not a scenario where you can play it safe, in my opinion, because if you play it safe in this new landscape, you will be left behind. Now, especially, like I said, with two of those teams playing in the Natty this year. But if you look at those games to get into the national championship, you will see that defense was a large reason for both of them getting there. Both of them creating enough pressure, creating enough disruption, getting PBUs, and holding it down in the tough positions against high-powered offenses. That's what helped them get into the national championship. But on top of that, special teams almost cost Michigan their chance at this national championship with multiple blunders on the special team side. So these hires are definitely massive. They're definitely going to shape the Gophers' outlook in 2024 and beyond, because you don't typically only hire a coach for 1 year. You got to kind of ride it out and see how it goes. So the Gophers are going to be in dire straits if they can't get these hires right. Now, I am not going to pretend to know what Coach Fleck would be looking for in a special teams coordinator, but we should know more details with both of these searches in the near future, because Coach Fleck has said that he wants to make his hire for defensive coordinator within that first week of January or so, prior to the convention, or at least through the convention. Well, that convention takes place January 7th through January 10th in Nashville. So that is the AFCA Coaches Convention. It's the biggest one of the year, and it's not just FBS, it's FCS, it's D2, it's D3. All the coaches are coming through here. Many coaches looking to get hired, many coaches doing interviews on hand at the thing. Time to kind of bond with your staff at these type of things, make other connections at this event. It is the big time event, and I would anticipate that the Gophers and their boat will be full either prior to that conference or during that conference, maybe just after it. So between January 7th and January 11th, I think the Gophers coaching staff will be full, and we will be covering for you here at Locked On Golden Gophers. We're going to talk about the defensive coordinator talk again later this week with hopeful candidates once again. Maybe if there's any updated news, any breaking info, we will be sure to cover that for you here at Locked On Golden Gophers. But there is one more story that was circling today, and that is former Gophers quarterback Athan Kaliakmanis has chose his new school. He's headed to Rutgers. I'm going to tell you what that means and why it added a little special flair to the next season, coming up next. All right, Gophers fans, we're wrapping this one up talking about former Gophers quarterback Athan Kaliakmanis. He has joined his new team of the future, still in the Big Ten. He is going to Rutgers with former offensive coordinator Kirk Ciarrocca. Now, it wasn't a fit here in Minnesota, and we wish him nothing but the best in his future endeavors, and hopefully he can win the job out in Rutgers, beat out Gavin Wimsatt, because Minnesota gets Rutgers late next season in Piscataway, and I think that could be a fun matchup heading into November. Now, the fit should be much better for Athan Kaliakmanis, as we saw his moments, his flashes. The best that we saw from Athan Kaliakmanis probably came under Kirk Ciarrocca. Now, that wasn't good for the Gophers this season, unfortunately, but then things took a turn. You know, at first he had actually committed to the Gophers with his relationship with Kirk Ciarrocca, and then Kirk Ciarrocca ended up going to Penn State during Athan's true freshman season. Then he comes back here for Athan's redshirt freshman season. He gets to work under his system. He gets to get into the terminology and how they break things down and how it all works. But then Tanner Morgan goes down to injury. Athan steps up, and he actually kind of balls out in certain amounts of games, has pretty good numbers for most of the part. If you take away the garbage time moments in the Illinois game, you take away almost all of that, takes away, I believe, half of his interceptions within that season. But then you look into the starts and the later times that we saw him within the season, the Wisconsin game, the bowl game prior to the injury, all those bigger moments came with Kirk Ciarrocca. His biggest passing production game with the Gophers came with Kirk Ciarrocca. So it could be a welcome change for Athan. And then heading into his sophomore year where he's going to be the starter. Kirk Ciarrocca goes to Rutgers where they're no longer working together. We saw what happened with Athan here and the new staff, and I just think there were likely errors on both sides from what they were expecting or trying to do and from what his talents are, and they weren't really shaping the offense to his style of play either. I think there were faults on both sides, but regardless, what is done, and it adds some flair to the next season. Now, the Gophers take on Rutgers on November 9th at Rutgers, where Minnesota has actually lost multiple pieces to that program. You talk about Harris Simiak, their defensive coordinator, came from the Gophers. Kirk Ciarrocca, their offensive coordinator, came from the Gophers. Flip Dixon, their starting safety, who was third on the team in tackles, came from the Gophers. And now you have Athan Kaliakmanis, quarterback, and his brother Dino, wide receiver, headed to the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. That's a whole lot of crossover between the Gophers and Rutgers. On top of that, I believe there was an offensive lineman. He's no longer with the team, but he had also, in PJ Fleck's time, transferred from Minnesota to Rutgers. I think it was Dunlap who went out that way. So regardless, there's been a lot of crossover between these two programs, mainly from leaving the Gophers and going to Rutgers. So maybe that adds a little bit of fire for Coach Fleck to really give some extra fire in wanting to prove that the team has grown and that they can move forward and that they still want to dominate. Maybe he lays his foot on the gas in that matchup a little bit more. It'll definitely be one you want to circle on your calendar for November 9th, because I think it could be a really fun game in that 2024 season. Now, overall, I wonder if it gives extra fire to the teammates as well to prove, look, we're still going to do it. We're going to go at it, regardless of if you are a quarterback or a brother or not. But regardless, it also gives the players time to catch up, check in, show love, and reconnect. So it'll be a great matchup regardless. The Gophers fans definitely need to circle that one, put a little star on the calendar, because it gives you an extra flair for a matchup that maybe wouldn't have been as fun for fans, or as, it's not your Iowa, your Wisconsin, the rivalry diehards. It's not a new flashy school coming in the California teams that we're up against next year. It's not North Carolina. That's a high major that the Gophers take on again. It's not your Michigans. It doesn't matter. Rutgers, regardless, they're starting to build up a little rivalry, a little bit of disdain, a little bit of too much crossover. And I think the Gophers are going to put a little bit of extra stamp in that matchup. So we'll see what happens with it, but it's definitely going to be one you're not going to want to miss. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On Golden Gophers. We're going to dive into basketball this week. We're going to talk about defensive coordinators and so much more. So be sure to hit subscribe. As always, row the boat, Sky Umak, go Gophers. And as always, like I just said, don't forget to subscribe.